Hey, Sub here. Wanted to hop in and talk a little bit about Call of Duty's changes to ranked play and what that means for us in general, specifically around the topic of crossplay and cheating and what that means for our ranked experience. So, Call of Duty, with the start of Season 2 here in Black Ops, has actually changed their system to allow crossplay to be disabled between console and PC, which is actually a great change. Really a huge benefit to console players and to legitimate players everywhere, except for one problem. The cheaters are still there, but now, according to Twitter and all of the online festivities, they're simply switching from their PC cheats over to the Cronus cheats. And so the Cronus Zen has been flying off the shelves almost as much as, or almost as fast, I should say, as the PlayStations and Xboxes have to facilitate this switch over for a lot of players to console play. And so, in chat, in comments on videos and on Twitter, I'm seeing a lot of the same accusations flying against some of the same people who have switched from their PCs to their consoles. And the argument is that they've just switched, their cheat provider to Cronus. And I think it's worth spending a little bit of time talking about this device, this Cronus device, talking about what it is, what it does, specifically what it is capable of doing and not doing, and then kind of delving into how you could really tell if somebody is cheating and not cheating, and whether or not it even makes sense to cheat with this thing, especially if you're a high profile or high skilled, specifically, player. And then, I want to touch a little bit on some reasons why the anti-cheat doesn't pick this thing up, because I think that's a really interesting conversation. So this is a longer video. I will not be putting descriptors in the text below because that takes too much work, but feel free to skip through or watch the video in its entirety. So what is the Cronus, right? We all hear, everybody who's plugged into Twitter has heard of this thing. Anybody with a console has maybe seen one in the store. They sell them in Best Buy, at GameStop. You can get them on Amazon for $100. They're not hard to find. But the question is, what are they? Why are they even allowed to be sold, right? Like, why is this legal? And the answer is actually surprising and interesting. So the Cronus is, at its root, a controller emulator. What that means is that it takes inputs from one type of controller, and it turns those inputs, it translates them into a different controller, and sends them to a machine. So, for example, if you have a PlayStation controller, right? Maybe you have the high-end PlayStation Edge controller, and you want to go to a friend's house and they only have an Xbox, you would need an emulator such as this, and there are other brands and other types that have varying degrees of that can be manipulated in various ways or not. But you would take an emulator and you would plug it into the emulator and then plug that into your friend's Xbox, and all of a sudden now you can use your nice PlayStation controller on an Xbox. Okay. And it's actually an interesting tool because it allows you to do things such as use non-standard controllers to play. We've all seen clips of people getting kills and winning games with some of the more interesting controllers that we've seen over the years, bongos and flutes and dance pads. And there's an ADA, kind of disabilities complement here, where a lot of people have custom made controllers or devices that enable them to play the game, and devices such as this, emulators such as this, are really what allow some of those devices to work and stay functional as systems evolve and support is dropped for older hardware. So it is not in and of itself a problem. It's not, so one of the reasons why you can get this thing so readily is that at its root, it is an emulator, right? So it just is translating one type of hardware signal and translating it to a different type. So, Xbox to PlayStation, Nintendo to Sony, whatever the case may be. So it's very hard to ban it, especially when you consider the ADA implication. So if you remove this, these types of devices from retail shelves, then it's going to create problems for people who actually do need something like this to function. And so I think we have to be very careful what we're talking about, right? When we want to hate on Cronus users and people that are using these things, what we need to target is the people that are using them unethically, or incorrectly, and using them to cheat at the games. Okay, this is the root of who we want to talk about, because there are people that might use them legitimately, and I want to be very clear where I separate our conversation. So going forward, I'm only talking about people that are using these to cheat, and to be unethical in their behavior. Okay, everybody else, we're not talking about you. So how does it work, right? So basically what this device does is it has, and this is for anybody who wants to find this out, you can go to their website, you can Google it on YouTube. They have tutorials, they explain everything. And this has been a passion project of mine to kind of understand this device, because as a former only console player, it was the big boogeyman for me as much as it was for most of my friends and a lot of other folks. And I see it on the timeline, I see it in comments all the time. People don't know what this is really. They just know that it can be used to cheat. And so, this is what we're breaking down. So the way it works is it has a couple of different USB ports in it, and it takes a controller that is legitimate, right? So your standard PlayStation or Xbox controller. And then it takes the controller that you want to use. And sometimes they can be the same, right? So you can have, if you just want to add cheats to your game, if you just want to use the scripting software that's available to you through their services, then you just need one controller, right? But it has to be a real controller. You can't you can't just, it doesn't always work with everything. Okay. And then what it does is it uses that and it passes the signal from that controller through to the end device, your console, your PC, whatever the case may be. And the reason it does that is because your controllers have a digital signature. Okay. And it has to handshake, it has to connect to your console or your PC so that the PC knows what it's talking to, right? And so Xbox and Sony both do this to varying degrees, specifically to keep kind of third-party fake controllers, knockoffs and stuff from entering the market and kind of diluting the market as you would. And so it requires this authentication chip, right, that exists in the motherboard on a standard controller. And then what happens is if you want to say, for example, use your PlayStation controller on an Xbox, you pass through the signal from your Xbox controller, and then it's read by the that signature is read by the Xbox or the PC, and then your PlayStation controller you would plug in to a different port, and what it does is it then takes the signals sent from the PlayStation controller and connects those and sends those through to your PlayStation or to the Xbox. So when you push buttons on the PlayStation controller, those signals get translated into Xbox commands and sent through to your through this authenticated controller. All right. And so we're going to kind of circle back on that later on why it's hard to get rid of from a cheating perspective. But that's important to understand that this is how the system works. Okay. So it uses authenticated hardware and then clones the signal and works from that way forward. So that brings us to the question of what's the point, right? Why do this? What can it get you? What can it do? And quite frankly, what can't it do? So what it can do is it can manipulate your controller for you in any way that the controller is capable of being manipulated, right? So you can have it, you can write macros. So, and they call them scripts that are just really advanced collections of macros that are all pre-programmed. Okay, so if you've ever dealt with a modded controller, if you've ever bought one of those, these modded controllers go back decades, and usually includes things like turbo options, right, where it's like you pull the trigger once and it rapid fires the trigger. And things of that nature have been around for a very long time. What this does is it takes that kind of to the next level, and it adds a degree of sophistication, right? So it'll chain together different commands, it'll combine different functions, right? And we're going to look at what some of those functions look like a little bit later. But basically, it allows you to either create additional functions of a button where you've only done one button, or it allows you to do combos, right? So these things are a little more prevalent. These issues are a little more prevalent in things like fighting games, right? Where combos and perfectly timed combos and whatnot are what are so important to be successful, right? Instead of having to remember all the stick manipulations and button combos to do finishing moves or Hadoukens or whatever the case may be, you can actually have it all one touch, right? Where you hit one button and it goes through a long combo that is perfectly timed every time, and it's a very effective and efficient way of cheating in those games. But in Call of Duty, it's a little bit different, right? So there aren't very many long combos or things that are hard to remember. What you run into more is how to cheese the game. So there are a few options in the scripts and macros that are available. So you have the classic, you have rapid fire, you have you have like auto drop shot, and some other things like that can be activated and may or may not be super beneficial to you all the time, but they exist, right? I think one of the popular ones in Warzone 1 was the automated slide cancel, right? So you could one button slide cancel, and Call of Duty has gotten in front of that by just giving it to us, which is how it should have been. But the point is, they can have you can do those kind of basic things, and it's pretty easy to go. The effect would be a little negligible. However, the two things that they really push in their marketing is recoil control, and they push aim assist, right? And so you see it a lot in YouTube. If you search around for Cronus aim assist, you'll find thousands of videos of people trying to sell you their scripts or their macros or their apps or whatever they call them, and they're trying to sell them as as like a way to cheat, to cheat and get more aim assist or aimbot. A lot of times they allude to it as aimbot, or they'll call it aimbot outright. They talk about getting rid of recoil. They talk about doing all these different things. So I want to talk a little bit about the mechanics between both for both the recoil that we have in Call of Duty, and I want to talk about aim assist. And it's going to be a very brief conversation. There are some terrific videos by just every creator you can imagine talking about these elements and how to use them and how to activate them, how they work. So I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but I do want to. But I think it's important to have a baseline understanding. So with recoil control in Call of Duty, when you fire your weapon, right, it puts one round straight ahead, and then it actually will move the point of aim of your gun up slightly, and sometimes have some horizontal to it. So maybe it's up to the side, whatever the case may be. When you're firing a weapon in automatic, right, it will fire up one, and then the next one will start from that point and fire up. And so every round is successively higher than the one before it. Okay. And so, and a lot of times they'll have a pattern to it, right? And it's a little more complicated, but at the end of the day, every shot goes up higher than the shot before it. So if you point it at a wall and you hold the trigger down and you don't touch your thumbsticks, you end up with a line of bullets that go up the wall. Okay. This is recoil pattern. And then the script for that, or the solution for that not the cheat for it, but the solution for that in the game is to learn how to pull you down on your thumbstick to counterbalance that, right? So, if you have a high recoil weapon, you need to pull farther down on your right thumbstick. And if you have a lower recoil weapon, you need to pull down less, right? And so learning recoil is generally about learning how much to pull down on your thumbstick I'm sorry, to counterbalance the movement of the recoil, the movement of, upwards movement of the guns. So what the Cronus is capable of doing is actually automatically applying a certain amount of pressure, a certain amount of downward pressure on your thumbstick, sending that signal to the game. All right. So when you pull the trigger, it automatically triggers the down on your thumbstick, which can be, in certain scenarios, can be actually very beneficial, because if you are careful about it and you build your guns correctly, with Call of Duty, there is minimal recoil as it is in general, okay, especially compared to other shooters. And then when you combine it with this script, you can more or less mitigate the effects of recoil through the scripting. All right. And so that's one of the big selling points, is that you can basically eliminate, they say you can eliminate, it doesn't 100% eliminate recoil, but you can very much minimize recoil in Call of Duty with the weapons based on how this script works. All right. And so that's kind of the big selling point number one. The number two selling point is they sell you on aim assist, right? If you Google Cronus aim assist, I'm talking thousands of videos from a lot of different people, and they're all trying to tell you that if you watch the video, you'll learn how to get Aimbot on your Cronus, or how to get, the sticky aim, right? Is the phrase I think that is most commonly used. And so what they do, it's kind of interesting. They are taking advantage of how most first-person shooters, specifically Call of Duty, operate and generate aim assist. Okay, and so we're gonna go over what aim assist is in Call of Duty very quickly, and then we're gonna look at how the Cronus can actually, what it's doing to generate their aim assist cheat. Okay, so what aim assist is in Call of Duty is it comes in two forms. Okay, there's the slowdown aim assist, where if you imagine you have your player character and then there is a bubble around the player character, and that bubble, basically within that bubble, your ADS sensitivity multiplier is decreased automatically. All right, so if you are at, say, a 1 ADS, all right, and then you move your crosshair across the screen, when it hits the aim assist bubble, that 1 ADS might become a 0.5 ADS. So now it takes twice as much effort to move your crosshair, and your crosshair moves, half the speed, which means that you automatically are making smaller corrections to your aim around your target, making it easier to stay on target and hit your shots. All right. This is called slowdown aim assist. The other type of aim assist that we have in Call of Duty, I'm sorry, before I get into that, the slowdown aim assist is activated by moving your right stick. So if your right stick is in motion, the aim assist mechanic is turned on. If you let go of your right stick and it's not in motion, then aim assist is off. All right, it will not track, or it will not trigger. Okay, and then on the left stick, and now there is aim assist on the what's it called on hipfire. There is some hipfire aim assist, but we're going to talk mostly on the on aim assist when you're ADS'd. Okay, and so when you ADS in Call of Duty, then there's something called rotational aim assist, where you are rotating your character model and the enemy that you're tracking is moving laterally across the screen. Your crosshair will actually lock onto and track along with that target as it moves. So the benefit to this is that if you are having to try and rotate your character quickly to catch up to someone who is maybe moving circularly around you, the computer helps you. The computer, understands what you're trying to do, understands the limits of controller, and will actually, boost your rotation so that you can stay with that for a certain amount of time. And so this also kicks in when you're moving, right? And so the objective from the developer's point of view is that when you're trying to stay on target, when you're trying to rotate, we are going to compensate for the limits of a controller by helping you continue that rotation as needed. So what does that mean for the Cronus and cheating and whatnot? Well, what the Cronus does is, in order to activate this aim assist, you have to be in motion, right? So you have to be rotating your body, your character body, rotating your view, rotating, basically turning your stick left or right, okay? When you do that, and I believe Hexsmith determined it's about 5% is the threshold for when aim assist will turn on versus turn off. And so when you have that 5%, at least that 5% motion, then the aim assist will kind of lock on and be active, right? So what does the Cronus do, and how does it work? So the way that the Cronus works is the Cronus will actually activate your sticks, put your sticks in motion for you, and then correct for it, right? So if you've ever had stick drift, right, you understand that you can put your controller down and your crosshair will just kind of wander without you touching it at all, right? It's just doing its own thing. And it's a defect in how controllers are designed. It's a problem with the mechanism. But we then can compensate for that a couple of ways. We adjust our dead zones, or most people, they learn to adapt, right? So they, the crosshair pushes a little bit, you push it back, pushes a little bit, you push it back, it drifts, you push it back, it drifts, you push it back, okay? Now imagine doing that all the time, all right? When you're in motion, don't forget, when you're in motion, aim assist is on. And so that's what the Cronus does. When your stick is in motion, it turns on aim assist. So the Cronus will take your, they can do it on both sticks, right? They can take your left stick, your movement stick, and they can move it side by side, side to side quickly, right? Same as if you were jiggling the thumbstick. And then what they do on the right hand side with your aim is they draw little shapes, like they just move it in circles or triangles or whatever shape they come up with. And the objective is to just keep it in motion all the time. Like whenever you are ready for a gunfight, whenever you're ADS'd, is usually the trigger that turns this on. You ADS, and it puts motion into your sticks so that your aim assist is always on. Okay. And so this is where, kind of lower skilled players run into problems of when they get into a gunfight, when a lot of people get into a gunfight, they stop moving. Okay. They stop, they don't strafe, they don't, or maybe they move forward or backwards, but there's not a lot of movement, which means a lot of times players will actually deactivate their aim assist in the middle of a gunfight because they stop moving. They are lined up on someone. They stop moving to the side. They just ADS, point their gun at them, and pull the trigger, which is great if the other, if your opponent doesn't move. However, if the person you're shooting at starts moving and you aren't, your aim assist is not active. You have to start moving and react to that to stay on target. With the Cronus, the goal is to have you always moving. Therefore, aim assist is always active. So if you're the type of player who gets into a gunfight and stops moving, you get the benefits of the rotational aim assist that you wouldn't normally have because you stop moving, okay? That, at the end of the day, is their goal. They have a lot of different techniques and descriptions and styles, and there's a lot of different ways they can approach it. But at the end of the day, that's what they're doing. And the reason they're doing that versus aimbotting, okay, is that the Cronus is a one-way device, all right? It doesn't receive information, right? It doesn't read or interact with the game in any way. What it does is it sends commands, just like your regular controller, to your Xbox or your PC, and the PC interprets that and translates that, and feeds that information to the game, okay? Unlike regular cheats, which actually inject directly into the game's memory and manipulate the game files directly, right? By reading enemy positions, reading, the bullets, manipulating them, manipulating your aim, your crosshairs in the game. These things are all injection cheats. Okay. The Cronus isn't capable of these things. It just isn't by its design, because it's just sending control signals one direction from the Cronus to your Xbox or to your PlayStation or to your PC, which means it doesn't have the ability to give you anything that's not in the game and anything that your controller is not capable of doing, which, you'll have some people try and defend that. It's not defendable. It's still cheating. However, when you look at like the scale of cheating, right, and the impact that it can have on the game, it really changes the conversation. So what I'm going to look at right now, though, is specifically I want to look at a controller emulator. Then this was a promotional video put out by Waymo or something is his name, and it's him running his Cronus through a controller emulator, so you can actually see what the game thinks the controller's doing. Okay, and then I want to compare that next to Joe playing right on Rebirth Island in the Vanguard era. And one of his videos, and I want to share. I want to look at the emulators kind of side by side, right? So you can see this is what the Cronus is doing when it's trying to get into a gunfight, and then you can see what arguably one of the best players in the game is doing, right? In the same in an actual scenario, and we're going to look at kind of the difference in how the inputs look and what's going on between these two inputs, because I think it's an important distinction to really visually see what's going on with the thumbsticks with a Cronus versus what a actual good player looks like. So this is Joe. This is the clip that I'm going to pull. We're going to look at this gunfight scenario, these gunfights a little bit. Now here's his controller emulator. This is his controller. Okay. And you can see how the thumbsticks move. I want you to look specifically at that right thumbstick. Now this right here, this section right here, this is actually the Cronus doing its thing. Okay. And I want you to look at the kind of the distinction between the two. You can see that it's pulling the left trigger, right? And you can see that right thumbstick is doing stuff. And when you look at what the right thumbstick is doing, this is the aim assist mechanic. This is what it does when you have the Cronus activating aim assist for you. Okay. This is what it does. And then we're going to look at how that compares to Joe. So you can see it just moves circles. It's creating circles versus Joe, which is always moving in these gunfights. He's always moving, but it doesn't look like this, right? It's not moving like that. It's always moving some way that's relative to the game, right? Versus, a regular player who a lot of times these sticks will stand still in a gunfight, right? And maybe just pull down. And so it's a very interesting look at how the Cronus kind of handles aim assist, right? You could see in the video, you can very clearly see, as soon as you pull that left trigger or the left trigger to turn on to ADS, that aim assist is just the little stick is just moving around a lot, right? And the reason it's doing that is, as I mentioned before, is it's trying to keep the aim assist going, right? It's trying to always stay active so that your aim assist bubble is always there. It's always strong. And so the big difference between someone who's good at the game, or even someone who's half decent at the game, is activating aim assist becomes like a second nature, right? So does recoil control. The Call of Duty is not a difficult game in that respect, right? There are people who are infinitely better than others. However, the base mechanics, are very comparable. Most people can get the hang of Call of Duty pretty quickly. So what you run into with the Cronus is you run into scenarios where the Cronus does a lot more than is necessary. And because it doesn't know what's going on, it doesn't have any understanding of what's happening in the game like a cheat would. So instead of actually instead of actually reacting to the players, it just has to always be right. So if you watch someone do controller emulator and they're using a Cronus, you will see a lot of movement that doesn't make sense. You'll see a lot of stuff, a lot of little circles, a lot of jiggles, and a lot of movements that don't relate to the gameplay that you're watching, right? So if you watch the Jowo clip again, and I'll put a link to his full segment down in the description, so you can check it out for yourself. But if you watch the Jowo clip, you will see that he's always got his sticks moving. He's always off center on his sticks when he's in a gunfight, and that's because he's activating that aim assist. He's either moving deliberately or he's just moving them just enough to make sure that aim assist is on. And for a guy like him, this is second nature. He doesn't have to put any effort into thinking. He doesn't have to use any brain cells to do it. He just does it, right? The same as the machine will do it, right? You put, you hit the left trigger and it starts moving the stick automatically. Good players will do the same thing. Now, that being said, does this turn out to be something that good players would even use? And the reality is I don't think so. I would go as far as to say that this would be detrimental to most good players, most even average players or better, because it's going to put your stick in scenarios where it's going to move you off target for things like sniping, for example, right? If you look at how much that stick is moving, if you imagine trying to snipe in that scenario, that's a very challenging scenario to stay on target with. And the aim assist is, it is just activating aim assist. So as soon as even if you just have stick drift on your controller, you're going to get the same effect, right? So really, if anything, a recoil control scenario is kind of one of those things of like, all right, maybe, but Call of Duty guns can be built to have very minimal recoil. So I think when, we look at the question of like, is someone who's very talented using Cronus? I highly doubt it, just off the cuff, because it's not going to provide them anything that most people can't learn on their own. And I think that's a really important fact. Like you don't need it at most skill levels, right? It is probably only beneficial to the very bottom of the skill brackets, because most people will just adapt and learn how to do this naturally from playing the game. Okay. Does that mean that players aren't using it? Well, of course not, right? It's selling like hotcakes. It sold 6,000 units this month. And it's been selling, way more than, hundreds of thousands of these things have been sold. Okay. But the question is, how effective in Call of Duty are these things? And the reality is they don't do a whole lot compared, they don't do a lot outside of recoil control, which can be useful, right? So people may be using it simply just to do that, which, judge that as you may. But the reality is, when you look at some of these, higher profile players, not only is it highly unlikely, but anybody who's using who's using a controller camera like this, or is on, especially if they have an emulator monitor up, like Jowo did in that clip, like as you could see from the clips using the Cronus versus his, you would tell immediately that something's not right. Okay, you would see all kinds of movement that makes no sense. And the reality is, when you watch this clip and you watch other players of that caliber play the game, you don't see any of that extra movement. You don't see any of the stick, shapes being drawn or sticks moving on their own. That they're almost always, they are always being manipulated by the player. Okay. So when it comes to, is someone using the Cronus, I think the question, it can be pretty well answered by if you can get a controller camera up, or not a controller visualizer up, right? If they're displaying that, you can tell immediately if there's a Cronus available, if they're using one. And then, the question of, well, the other question that comes up is, well, why doesn't the anti-cheat just catch it, right? I mean, if you watch the movement, it's very unnatural. It's very consistent. And the reality is that there's a couple of different reasons why the anti-cheats have a very hard time picking up the Cronus and blocking it. One is, the device hides itself as a legitimate controller. So as I mentioned at the top of the episode, it's authenticating with the computer through a legitimate controller. Okay, so that's step one. So the computer thinks it's talking to a legitimate controller, and then all of the inputs and everything that it's asked to do are all physically capable on the controller. Like, it can be done. All right. And so for the anti-cheat, you aren't going to mechanically catch this thing because, outside of some fringe scenarios that don't really happen anymore. But you're not going to catch this thing on a mechanical issue. What you could try and catch it on is through machine learning, right, or AI, where it's monitoring the movement of the stick and looking for these kind of patterns, right? And so they tried that. Call of Duty announced that a while back, that they were kind of trying to detect some of these patterns, and what they were looking for are very repetitive patterns. Evenly, like if you are rapid firing, right, and you are shooting 20 times per second, and it's every single, evenly spaced, right? That's a pretty obvious machined pattern, right? It's not intuitive to humans to be super precise and super accurate and super consistent like that. So what they actually do is they will go in and they will modify the timings of all of this stuff so that it is actually more human-like, right? They produce variations. And so a lot of times what they do is, so I'll look at how they handle rapid fire. What they do is they actually have some variations in the rapid fire where the speed does exceed the maximum fire rate of the weapon most of the time. Okay, so you get that max fire rate, but when the machine looks at it, what they actually see is they see an inconsistent series of presses, right? The buttons are not consistent. And as a result, a machine learning or a machine algorithm would need to err on the side of a human user in that case versus a machine user, because false positives are a huge problem, right? So if, look at the shadow ban system that we have now, how many false positives does that produce every single day that we hear about, right? And it really undercuts our faith as players in the system as a whole, right? And then we look at the Bobby Pop scenario where, he was banned, and we know that he was banned falsely. And so it really undercut the legitimacy of past bans, right? And the result ended up being a lot of people got let out of, let out of jail because, their convictions were overturned because this system was proven to be not as foolproof as we were led to believe. And so in these sort of scenarios, the bans have to be absolute. They have to be right on the money, and they can't be throwing false positives. They have to throw more false negatives than false positives, which means stuff like this is really hard for the machine to pin down and be very accurate on. And so the reality is it usually lets it slide. The other side of it is the programming that goes into it. The people that design these things are very sophisticated. They understand how the machine learning anti-cheat behaves, right? And so they're writing code to counteract it by introducing errors and some degrees of randomness that doesn't affect their end product, but will fool the or create enough of a shadow of a doubt in the AI system that the AI won't flag it. And so between that and the authentication issues, this is one of those things that's going to be extremely difficult to stamp out long term with a high degree of accuracy. And fortunately for us, it doesn't really make a ton of difference because the thing doesn't do a whole lot for cheaters, right? This isn't like injection cheaters. It's not like DMA cheats. It's not, it's not at that level. It doesn't give you any information about what's going on in the game. It's actions can be recreated by simply banging your controller on the desk to give it some stick drift. These sort of, these sort of basic functions that exist in the game is what it takes advantage of. And it's stuff that good players, honestly, they learn to do natively. And anybody can learn to really, with a little bit of effort, can learn to take advantage of the same systems that the Cronus creates through this, through this system. So at the end of the day, the big bad Cronus that kind of haunts console players' dreams, in my opinion, isn't really worth the amount of hype that it gets. I don't think that it does as much as people think it does. It's definitely not in use by a lot of creators and a lot of people that are, that are publicly out there, because to be honest, most of those would be held back by it, if anything. So really, if you're hard stuck in bronze or silver, like, it's probably affecting you. But otherwise, I think it's one of those things that we're seeing more. It's not as big of a deal as we're making it out to be. So that's what I got for you. If you made it this far, I appreciate it. Drop your comments and thoughts in the description below, and I'll catch you on the next one.